It just baffles me that in the United States of America, with our Constitution and Bill of Rights that clearly has the idea of separation of church and state, which has been enforced numerous times in court cases, that we still have any debate at all over the recognition of same-sex marriage. I'm basically 100% positive that there are absolutely no legitimate arguments against gay marriage that have not been debunked extensively other than religious ones. And even then, saying that they haven't been refuted is a bit inaccurate. Essentially, every single argument can boil down to it's gross and abnormal, so it should be banned. I will be going over several arguments against gay marriage in this video. First, let's go over the religious argument. In the US, the majority of the population is Christian, and those who oppose same-sex marriage love trying to quote the Bible, and specifically Leviticus, to prove that God hates gays. Well, Leviticus doesn't actually say anything about gays being able to marry. It simply states that a man having sex with another man is punishable by death. I don't see many opponents of same-sex marriage demanding the death penalty for participants in gay sex. Thankfully, though there's still hypocrites for not doing so. I mean, there are some who actually do, but fortunately most people would agree that they're crazy. Actually, Leviticus merely condemns a man sleeping with another man, and doesn't really say anything about female homosexuality. If these Christians actually knew their Bible, they would only be targeting male homosexuals, so it confuses me when they restrict marriage from all homosexuals. In addition to male homosexuality, there are numerous things in Leviticus that are condemned and may be punishable by death, very few of which any Christian would actually support. Here are some. Tattoos, blasphemy, so I guess there's no more freedom of speech. Eating shellfish, eating pork, or even playing with their skin, so no more football for us Americans. Having a round haircut, so all the Beatles will be burning in hell. Wearing polyester, men shaving their sideburns, and having sex with a woman while she's on her period, among many other things. It seems that these homophobes willfully ignore these rules that are stated very clearly in the same chapter that they use to condemn gays. And this is just Leviticus. There are many rules stated throughout the Bible that Christians certainly do not follow and would not enforce. Let's look at some of the commandments. The first one states that no one shall have any god before the one depicted in the Old Testament. So this would require abolishing the First Amendment to the Constitution, which is one of the founding principles of freedom in the United States. The fourth commandment requires keeping the Sabbath day holy and allowing no one to work on it. Disregarding the conflict over which day this actually is, would it really be a good idea to have hospital workers, law enforcement, firefighters, and so on, not be working for one day every week? So people who use the Bible as evidence against same-sex marriage aren't really using the Bible at all. They just cherry-pick it to justify their own irrational hatred of homosexuals. And honestly, this is only done by a handful of people. I do believe that the majority of Christians who think marriage should be between a man and a woman aren't really homophobes. They just blindly accept that when someone says that something is condemned in the Bible, then it's true. But even if the Bible actually condemned homosexual marriage and Christians opposing same-sex marriage did not cherry-pick their Bible, this still would not be a useful argument against same-sex marriage, as our Constitution has the Establishment Clause, which states that the government shall not recognize any religion, or religion in general, as superior to any other. In other words, even if God exists and hates homosexuals, why should the heathens have to follow your religion? It shouldn't be any of your business, and it doesn't affect you in any way. Whether you like it or not, homosexuals are going to be homosexuals, even if they aren't allowed to marry. Will God strike down upon all of us with great anger if we accept homosexuality? No, really, some people actually use this as an argument. I'm sorry, but I can't remember the last time divine retribution was taken into consideration in policymaking in the United States of America. The most common argument against same-sex marriage that isn't completely religious is that it will somehow destroy the family. How this will happen is not really explained well. Not to mention, in every other country that allows gays to marry, the family seems to be functioning very well. Perhaps more so since no one has fear of being oppressed in regards to the right to marry the person they love. They also claim that it will destroy marriage. Again, how this will happen is not explained. Marriage has changed drastically throughout history. We no longer allow polygamy or concubines. We also don't require the wife to be a virgin on her wedding day, lest she be stoned. Rape victims will also not be forced to marry their rapists. Divorce is also allowed in this day and age. I actually find it amusing how some of the most vocal anti-gay marriage activists, such as Rush Limbaugh, have had multiple divorces throughout their adult life. Not to mention, interracial couples can marry now, along with two who belong to different religions. So if illegalizing having multiple wives and legalizing divorce and interracial and interfaith marriage hasn't destroyed the idea of marriage, why would allowing two of the same gender to marry? One argument that I've heard countless times is maintaining that homosexuals can just get civil unions. After all, they would basically get the same benefits as a marriage, so what's the problem? Well, my response to this is why not just let them be able to get married? This, at its core, is just a new version of the separate but equal argument that was used to segregate African Americans into different schools, different theaters, and different seats on buses. We've determined throughout American history that separate is inherently unequal. Why do we suddenly stop when it involves marriage and homosexuals? One argument against same-sex marriage is that it is supposedly unnatural. Homosexuality has been observed in many different species in the world, showing that it isn't just limited to us humans. But that's not really relevant, as this argument assumes that humans are not a part of nature and are special in some arbitrary way, which is simply not true. Humans are just a part of nature as anything else that exists. Some will attempt to win over so-called evolutionists to their side by saying homosexuality will limit evolution and hold back the human race, or some other crazy argument like that. I'm guessing they assume that evolutionists are obsessed with the advancement of the human race in some eugenics kind of way, but this is obviously not true, because if we were, we wouldn't be targeting homosexuals. We would be targeting those who oppose same-sex marriage. But in all seriousness, homosexuality does not actually prevent individuals from having children. It just severely limits the desire to make them. In addition to this, there isn't really a single gay gene that only affects sexuality. Homosexuality is more than likely a mix of genetic and environmental factors. The genetic part affects more than just sexuality, and these traits that come along with being homosexual may be beneficial to the human race as a whole, rather than just the individual. But even if homosexuality was demonstrated to be useless for the human race, why should we discriminate against them? This, and claiming that being gay is unnatural, is an example of the naturalist fallacy. Just because something is a part of nature, or normal, does not mean it is good or bad. Should we allow people to suffer from cancer and AIDS, along with not providing help to victims of natural disasters, just because they are natural? This argument is also not even related to same-sex marriage, as it just targets homosexuality in general. Still, it confuses me when people use it merely as an argument against gay marriage. Another argument I've heard is that judges will be forced to perhaps go against their religious views and recognize the marriage of two homosexuals. In other words, they will have to do their jobs. Nothing about recognizing gay marriages would require people to accept homosexuals. If a judge were to deny a marriage between a Caucasian and an African American, or between a Christian and a Muslim, there would be an outrage. Why is it suddenly acceptable if the denied couple is two men or two women? There are aspects of many jobs that would go against the religious views of some people. They will either need to get over it or find a different job. This isn't religious discrimination, this is just how rules work. If a side effect of an important rule is that it happens to go against the religion of some, then oh well. If a Hindu waiter at a restaurant refuses to serve meat to customers, he can be fired. Judges should not be exempt from this either. People also claim that it will force churches to marry gay couples. Well, actually, no, it wouldn't. That would be, in fact, illegal, as it would violate the Establishment Clause. A church can deny any couple a marriage, for any reason or even no reason. The entire debate is over the legal recognition of marriage and the benefits that come along with it, such as veterans' benefits. Allowing homosexuals to marry is a matter of rights, not forcing Christian churches to marry them or even accept them as human beings. Some churches are already starting to marry gay couples anyway. Some will say that allowing gays to marry would violate the freedom of religion, as it would go against their religious views. Well, tough shit. If your hatred and bigotry is motivated by religion, it is still hatred and bigotry. Free expression does not include hate crime, for example. Your religious views are not held in higher regard than other people's rights. Your religious freedom does not include infringing upon the freedoms of someone else. This would only be a valid argument at all if the government was forcing religious people to marry someone of the same sex, but that is obviously not what is going on in the slightest. This is not only a failed attempt to justify homophobia on the basis of religion, it is even an attempt to use this to influence policy making. Another argument is the whole, but think of the children, aspect of gay couples. The entire idea that children raised by gay couples do not grow up well has been debunked extensively, and the fact that people still believe this can only be due to ignorance of the evidence or just plain homophobia. Evidence shows that homosexual parents are just as good at raising children as heterosexuals. In fact, homosexual parents could be even better. The children will be exposed to much more diversity than the simple two-white parent home. This actually applies to anything outside of the norm. The children will be much less likely to discriminate against people who are different while they're at school. Plus, gay couples can't accidentally get pregnant, nor can they have more children than they planned. They can't get pregnant at all. They will generally be much more prepared for a child than a heterosexual couple who gets pregnant by accident. Some will say that there needs to be a male and female role model in a child's life. This simply ignores the existence of grandparents, aunts and uncles, coaches, teachers, etc. Kids have much more than just their parents that raised them in their life. But this argument also doesn't even consider widowed or divorced couples, which raises the question of why those who oppose gays being able to adopt do not target them. Regardless, this argument doesn't even address same-sex marriage at all anyways. If it were demonstrated that gay couples could not raise healthy children, it would not be an argument against their right to marry. Some will say that if simply loving each other is good enough grounds for marriage, then we should also allow siblings, adults and children, and people and animals to marry. But incest carries a much higher probability of genetic disorders in children, so there actually is a rational basis for prohibiting it. And adult-child marriages and bestiality would violate informed consent, as children are not old enough to give consent, and animals are physically incapable of doing so. Some will take this slippery slope argument even further by stating that the activists that achieve their goal of legalizing gay marriage will then start to campaign for incest marriages and interspecies marriage, and eventually for inanimate object marriage. They will then state by the time this all happens, everyone will either be gay or has married some animal or object. This argument is so fucking stupid that I can't believe people seriously try to use it. For one thing, people who actively fight in support of gay marriage tend to stop after achieving this goal, which is demonstrated by the fact that none of this has occurred in any country that has allowed same-sex marriage. Also, heterosexuals are, in fact, heterosexuals. Not many of them are just biding their time, waiting for same-sex marriage, bestiality, or inanimate object marriage to be legalized in order to come out of the closet. I simply cannot believe that in this advanced of a nation, with our constitution that clearly separates church and state, that we still don't allow homosexuals to get married throughout the entire country. There are literally no good arguments against gay marriage. Even if you think it is wrong for gays to marry due to your religious views, you should still support their right to do so if you care about what our country and constitution stands for, along with the recognition of the fact that not everyone has to follow your views. You certainly don't have any problem letting people be of a different religion, which strictly violates one of your religion's rules, so why would you force others who may not even be Christian to follow your Christian views on marriage?